Welcome to the best of Swan's Place. Sit back and relive your favorite Swan's Place moments.
Up in that family, we'd go to church regular all the time. We'd go out to a little country church, a little Swedish church out there in the country. And I'd be in the back, and the preacher would be preaching. You know, he had that kind of way about him. He'd preach. He said, "What should we do with sin?" He was just that style. Nothing wrong with that style. That was just his style. He said, "What should we do with sin?" And I went, "Well, bless his heart, he does not know." I've got to help this man. He does not know. And I had ADD back then. You know, I couldn't help it. Attention deficit, man. I was a little hyper back then. See, back then we didn't have a Ritalin. We were just a red doll. You know what I mean? That's the way we were. And back then it just beat the kid good. You kids don't know how good you got it now. But I'd be back there and I started hyper and had the bulletin filled in the zeros and the B's and the D's and because that kept me occupied. And then we had those funeral fans. Thank God for those funeral fans, you know. And the funeral home donated the fan, and then the doctors gave us some tongue depressors to staple on there. And our little church, we only had one staple in there because we were Methodist, and Methodists were methodical people. Methodists are methodical people. And it wasn't until later I became a Baptist, and they put me under till I bubbled, you know what I mean? And matter of fact, they put me under and wouldn't let me up until I said tithe. But that's just sort of the ministry of it, you know. But anyhow, Baptists have two staples in their fan because they get excited during revival. And now my Baptist and charismatic friends have 3 bolts that go in there because they get all excited and can lose one in a moment of joy. You know, it can just sort of happen. Well, anyhow, I was back there in the back, and the preacher, he was just preaching, "What should we do with sin?" And my little old heart, it went out to him. I sort of stood up. I didn't want to say anything out loud, but I wanted to help the man, and so I just sort of lip synced to him. "I don't know. I don't know." But he never noticed me. He never noticed. It hurt my heart. It hurt my heart. You see, when you're ADD, you have a tender heart. And I wanted to help the man. Well, preachers repeat themselves 2 or 3 times. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but he comes back the second time, sort of cries it out, and says, "What should we do with sin?" And I went, bless his heart, he does not know. I must help him. I just felt led of the Lord, ma'am. I felt led of the Lord. And so I stood up a second time with greater intensity. "I don't know. We don't know. They don't know. They don't know. You don't know. Only God knows." You know, I'm trying to help this man as best I can. And my mom and daddy, Floyd Leon and Pauline Bernadine, were sitting up towards the front. You know, they'd let me sit back there by myself. And I thought, I've got to help this guy, but how do I do it? But finally I said to myself, if he asks it one more time, I'm just going to answer that man. I'm going to have to answer him out loud. And I decided, which voice should I use? And I thought, well, I use the voice of old Don Knotts, old Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show, because I grew up watching that show. Opie and I are both born in 53, everything. So I just thought I'd use Barney's voice. So sure enough, you know, that was my plan. And I figured, you know, I'd answer, you know, preacher would have an answer. God's people would be blessed. And my mom and daddy up here wouldn't know it was me back there. And so sure enough, third time we preachers, we repeat ourselves so often. He sort of whispered, "What should we do with sin? Sin. Sin." I just sort of stood up, threw my little shoulders back, and the voice of old Barney Fife, I said, "Nip it in the bud. You got to nip it, nip it, nip it. Nip it in the bud. You got to nip it. Let's go." Next thing I knew, I was sitting between my mom and my daddy. You gotta have a sense of humor. Now, you just got to loosen up, have a sense of humor. My parents knew early on that I had a sense of humor, and you know, it's paying the bills nowadays, you know, but I can remember starting out with that sense of humor, and I'm trying to keep it and hold on to it, because where there's humor, where there's joy, where there's life, it's all made possible, we know, by Jesus Christ, who's our rock, and lets us stand on that kind of rock so we can laugh and live. I was just thinking about some relationships, thinking about my little mama, Pauline Bernadine, and my daddy, Floyd Leon, And I love old Mom and Daddy. And I think about how they sort of, you know, would interact and everything with dealing with me. If you can imagine how they had to deal with me, ADD and all those kinds of things. And, you know, back then ADD, you know, they didn't know what ADD was. It was just beat the kid good back then. It was just, we had no riddling. You were just a riddle. And, but I can remember those days when I'd come home, my little mama, she'd be wanting me to hug on her, and she'd be standing there, and she'd say, hug your mother. I said, hug your mother. I said, Mama, I ain't going to hug on you. You know how boys go through that stage. And she said, I said, hug your mother. Hug your mother. And I said, well, Mama, I ain't in the mood. She said, I remember when you were a little boy, how you loved your mother all the time, and it was special. And you were Mama's boy, I remember. And it hurts. It hurts. And I said, well, Mama, hug your mother. And you know they're getting shook up when they start skipping syllables. I said, hug your mother. And you know they're upset when they skip the syllables. And when they get the little shoulder shakes. I said, hug your mother. And old Daddy Floyd Leon, he was sitting over in a lazy boy recliner nearby. And you know how dads are. Dads hear what they want to hear. Say amen if you're with me. You know, daddies, they hear what they want to hear. He was reading the Austin American Statesman paper. But he heard that Mama was unhappy. He knew if Mama was unhappy, later on he could be unhappy. You know what I mean? Now, we're not going there, but we're not going to talk about that for a while. But anyhow, that's my daddy's heartbeat. So he felt led of the Lord to grab that stick on the side of the lazy boy and just grab that thing, boom, and just broke that thing down and stood up 6'2". Hug your mother, boy. You better hug your mother, boy. And, boy, I didn't argue with Floyd. I put my arms around her just barely, and she said, that is not a hug. That is not a hug. And I looked at my daddy and I read his lips. Hug your mother. Man, I picked her up. I squeezed her tight. I kissed her on the neck and right on the mouth, like in the movies. Just, I mean, I planted one on the woman, just on the lips, on the mouth. And she pulls away and says, I'm your mother. I am your mother. I am your mother. I said, well, Mama, I kissed you. I don't care for kissing on my mouth like that. I said, well, I kissed you, Mama. I don't care. I don't appreciate that. That's not the way. I don't like that at all. I said, well, don't you and Daddy kiss that way? No, we don't. You know what I said? Poor old Daddy. I tell you, there are some things that can happen in your life and my life that you never dream of happening, but they have happened. Several years ago, I was in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, there in the deep South. And after I finished entertaining, I had a lady come up and say to me, she said, you know, I had something interesting happen to my daughter's best friend in Houston, Texas. And I said, well, good, tell me about it. And she began to tell me about it, and I thought, well, I've heard so many stories, I'll just sort of endure this story for the Lord. And he let her have a ministry of telling me a story, so she could tell me that she had told me a story. But this was a tremendous story. Folks, this eventually made the AP News. I ain't lying. I mean, it made the big time. And this is what happened. Her friend down in Houston was coming out of the grocery store. And she was walking out of the grocery store, and she had her keys between her fingers, you know, a key between each finger, like, you know, key knuckles. And nowadays you've got to. I mean, seriously, nowadays you have to be. And she was very conscientious. She'd been through some training things, and she knew how to look underneath cars and everything, look around, walk with determination. And she got to her car, looked around, put the key in there carefully, looked in the back seat of her car. She's very, very methodical. Beginning to open her door, she looks over at this car that's on next to her car. She looks over there, and there's this little lady, this little old lady, just sort of slumped against, over her windshield, her face right in the windshield. Just slumped over. Scared her to death. She went, oh, my soul. She goes over there, gets over there and knocks on the window. Ma'am, are you okay? Ma'am, are you okay? And she just lay there and she said, I've been shot in the back of my head. She went, oh. She pulled out her little cell phone, 911. She called and she said, there's a lady that's been shot here in the grocery store. And where are you, lady? I'm over here by Exxon and McDonald's and Mobil. Okay, lady, there's a bunch of McDonald's and Mobils and Exxons everywhere. Where are you? In Houston, Texas. And finally got a street out. Okay, stay with her. We'll be right on our way. She goes back and knocks on the window. Ma'am, can you just open up the door, open the latch up, and let me in? Let me help you. I can't move. I've been shot in the back of my head. My brains are coming out. What? My brains are coming out of the back of my head right now as we speak. And she went. She goes around to the opposite side of the car to see if that door is open. That door is locked. She looks in there, and this poor little lady, groceries, all these groceries in the front seat, and this little lady just slumped over the wheel. Her face just almost mashed into the windshield, and she tried to find and see how bad she had been shot in the back of her head, and she said, "Lady, you haven't been shot in the back of your head. A can of biscuits exploded and they walked on the back of your head." But this lady wouldn't believe it. She said, "Now those are my brains they're coming out." She said, "A can of biscuits exploded, woman." And finally, she threw herself on top of the car, put her face in the windshield. "Man, a can of biscuits exploded!" And sure enough, in that hot summer of Houston, a can of biscuits exploded. A big wad of biscuit just wad right on the back of her head.